One of my favorite images from the last couple years was in 2011 during the Arab uprising. And it was part of the Arab Spring in Egypt at Tahrir Square. There were images as there were these huge protests to overthrow the corrupt government of Muslims when they would do their daily prayers. The Christian protesters who were protesting alongside them would gather around them and hold hands to hold the space and protect them while they were praying. And they had those images alongside those of the Christian churches. When the Coptic Christians would go to church on Sundays, the Muslims would gather around the churches and would hold hands around them to keep the police from entering and to protect them. And it was such a time of hopefulness because you could see that people had a greater cause that they were coming together for. So in the midst of that, there wasn't this, well, you're a Christian and you're Muslim, so we can't come together. There was this, we have a bigger cause, and that's what unites us. And I wish that we didn't need something like that in order to come together. We had something similar earlier this year. I was looking online on Google Maps to see what other traditions are within just a few kilometers of this church where we have this space. And I didn't even know this. I work in Interfaith, but there are 2 Hindu temples within 3 kilometers of here. There are 3 mosques, so Muslim mosques. There are 2 Buddhist sanghas. The Gurdwara is just about 4 kilometers away, the nearest Gurdwara of many. And the only one of those that I've actually been in was the one mosque, El Jamia, that had a candlelight vigil on March 15th, the night of the Christchurch attack in New Zealand. That night, there was this horrible attack where someone killed dozens and dozens of people in a mosque in New Zealand. So then that mosque opened up and it had hundreds of people from all traditions all around the city come and gather. We sang songs. There were local New Zealander expats who were Christian who were singing hymns at this. I remember there were Jews outside who were handing out candles to put in the rocks out front. And somebody said during this, I wish we got together like this, not just when there's an attack. And that's so true. But I think that's what happens, is we sort of silo ourselves in our own communities until something really horrible goes wrong. And then suddenly we say, wait a minute, we have to do something about this. You know, maybe we should work with other folks. And I think based on the stuff we were talking about before, that we're always at that crisis point now. With climate change, with all of these humanitarian things that we're concerned about, with suddenly, I think there are more refugees now than there have been since World War II. People having to flee their home countries because their home countries are underwater. Having huge storms right through. Suddenly people are having to move. They're not having the kind of job security that they had before, the kind of security in where they want to live. And that kind, we can't be comfortable anymore. So I think that we're actually always at that state now, but we don't really realize it. So it's most comfortable for us to just sort of go back and hang out with the people who look like us, the people who worship like us, who have the same backgrounds. And I wonder what it takes for us to realize, hey, wait a minute, I think we need to make those kind of connections now. And that's what I hope that we're doing here. So I was thinking about what keeps us from doing that. So I think the one thing is feeling comfortable. I have a friend who belongs to a group that practices a lot of First Nations spiritual practices, but then I asked her if anybody in that group is a First Nations person, and she said no. And I said, well, how did that happen? And she said, well, I just don't know any First Nations people. And I said, well, I'm surely you meet them along the way at work and in the community and in these things. And she said, well, I guess we don't feel like we have anything in common. And I said, but that's the practices that you're using. You're using those spiritual practices. But I think that this is a common thing that we have. I think that a lot of us have this idea that we have nothing in common with other folks. And one of the apparently odd things about me is I like having this chameleon quality where I like going into different communities, and even if I don't know that much about them. So last year we went, I guess it was earlier this year, we went to a Gurdwara. And I know I probably know about this much about the Sikh tradition. I'm learning more now, but I know about this much. But I knew that it was open, and they always have a langar, where it's always available for food, and you can come in. So our family, we ended up going as part of the Interfaith pilgrimage, and we got invited in, and they had prayers, and they fed us this thing that's very similar to actually what they eat in the Ismaili mosques, which we're like, oh, that's so interesting. It's a very similar kind of thing. There's something similar that we can connect with here. And it was open, and they said, oh, we're open all the time. You know, you're always welcome. But I said, how many other people who aren't Sikh come in here? And they said, well, not really, hardly anyone. And a lot of the congregations are like that, and a lot of our communities are like that. We're sort of comfortable with being with the people who we are always with. It's less awkward that way. And so I think what we're trying to do here is make it so there's some community where everyone always feels the same level of awkward. So then it's okay, so we can kind of work through some of that together. I think another thing that keeps us from knowing our neighbors is fear. And I think it's a couple of different kinds of fear. I think there's one level of fear that is just, well, I don't really trust them. I'm not sure what exactly they believe. I think that they have some beliefs that are really wrong-headed or might even be evil, and so I don't really want to spend a lot of time with them because I don't want to be subjected to those beliefs. And I found that there's this interesting thing, the more you study other traditions, that even things that on paper might look like you could never possibly agree with them, when you start to hang out with folks from that tradition and learn more about them from those who practice them, it's not done in that way. Like, we all have more in common than we think. So I found this as a Buddhist. There are folks who don't know very much about Buddhism who will say, well, I think Buddhism is very negative. It seems like a very nihilist tradition because you're always talking about this emptiness and you just want to sit, and it's like you don't want to experience life. There's no joy there. It's just very stern and kind of stoic. And sure, I've met some Buddhists like that, to be fair. That is, I do know a couple people like that. But in general, even that idea of emptiness doesn't mean emptiness in the way that we think of it. It means that nothing is separate from anything else. So when I say something's empty, I mean it's empty of, that everything has this emptiness means nothing stands by itself, nothing is an island, it's all interconnected. So actually saying that all these things have this emptiness is this tremendously freeing, connecting thing, not this nihilist thing. And instead of saying, well, let's not focus on, the next life because it's just going to happen over and over again, let's just focus on what's going on now. That's about actually finding the joy in our day-to-day life. And this belief that actually you can have more joy, that almost you're not doing it right if you're not finding joy and happiness and what's just exquisite about every moment of life. So there's more fun in that than this kind of stoicism. And like, no, you just sit in silence for 12 days and say nothing to anyone. But you won't know that if you just read about it. And I've met so many people who will study other traditions, but not in an open-hearted kind of way. They're not actually reading them to learn about the other traditions. They're reading them to kind of get a sense so they can figure out why those people are wrong and why they're correct in whatever it is they believe. And I think that's another level of the fear. So I think one level of fear is that other people are just inherently wrong, and so I don't want to hang out with them. I think there's another level of fear which says, well, if I start to study these other things, then what if that changes what I believe? And I think those of us who are doing compassionate listening, I think this kind of came up at the training, because I've noticed people will get to the point where, especially when they're in conflict with someone, they'll say, well, I just can't believe that. Like, I noticed this especially Israelis and Palestinians, but this can happen in all kinds of things. They'll say, well, no, it's completely their fault. My group, we had to do all the things we did, no matter how violent those things were, and they're completely wrong. And one of the compassionate listening questions is, what would it be like if something about what they're saying is true? And you'll actually see people freeze, and often they'll start to cry, because they'll say, well, but if that's true, then I'd have to open up my viewpoint, and then I might have to see that there's something about my perspective that's wrong, or that doesn't fit with this. And that's so scary. There's this fear that as soon as we start listening, you'll just switch. And it's interesting with traditions, because that's actually not at all the point of what we're doing here. I don't hang out with folks from different traditions because I want to convert to those traditions, much to everyone's confusion, apparently. And it's also not because I'm secretly in my head saying, oh, well, that's stupid. You know, my tradition, we do that better. I don't know why you do it that way. It's not this kind of silent judging thing. It's this kind of openness and this belief that we can really connect with each other and we can learn from each other. And that's where I think for me, I love Interfaith because I love people. I deeply love people, and I think that our spiritual practices and our beliefs, those are so much a part of who we are, that if we never learn from other people what it is they believe and what it is they do, we'll never really get those people. We won't understand them. And then if we say, well, I want to hang out with them, but I don't want to do it in any kind of religious way, then we're going to walk around with these ideas that all Buddhists are nihilists, or all Muslim men are misogynists, or all Christians believe in this triumphalism, that like, well, we won and we're superior. The Christians I know don't believe that. The Muslim men I know are not misogynists, but people think that because they don't actually hang out with them. And if they do hang out with them, they don't talk about religion, because they have these kind of fears. And I think in Buddhism there's this analogy, there's this saying, and it gets used in lots of different ways, all of which I love, but it's the raft is not the shore. And so one of those ideas is it's like the Dharma, the Buddhist teachings, are a raft. And the point is not to get to know the raft and to know everything about the raft. The point is to ride on the raft and get over the water and get to the other shore. So that if you do it right, once you get to the other shore, which is this kind of enlightenment space, this tremendous peace, this God space, once you get there, you let go of the raft. Because if you're so attached to the raft, then you get there and you're trying to drag the raft around with you on the beach or through the woods on the other side, and you can't actually get anywhere. Then you care more about the raft than the shore. And that can be used in so many ways. But I think that for me, what I really want is I see Interfaith as this wonderfully scrappy flotilla of people with different kinds of boats, all trying to get to the shore. And we might think the shore is different. Like some of us might say, you know, I really want to get to the island on the other side, and that island is God, and that's my goal. And someone else might say, you know, I'm pretty sure that's not an island. I heard there are beaches over there. And someone else is like, no, I think it's rocky. You're like, you know what? That's fine, because we're not even over there yet. But instead of having that argument, then how about we go together? And then we all have these different kinds of boats. So if Buddhism has a raft, I just love this idea. I wish I could draw it. Maybe we should ask Marcus to do this. If you have like a raft and it's linked up with somebody in a kayak, and somebody's in a bathtub, and they're like, I don't even need any of these fancy boats, I'm just gonna get over there myself. And somebody's like, no, I'm gonna swim as far as I can. And you might have a huge cruise ship that will say, well, look, we'll go so much faster. But it won't go so much faster if you have to go around other islands to get there. You're gonna get stuck, and you're gonna need the help of the bathtub and of the raft. And of all these, you got like a little yacht, and you have all these things. So instead of spending all the time on this side, saying, well, no, I know for certain that it's rocky over there, or it's an island over there, that isn't that useful. And then instead of trying to sink each other's boats, which I think is what a lot of us do, we can actually work together. And then I just love this idea that we can link up, and we can say, you know what, your cruise ship is magnificent. Tell me all about it. I want to, while we're all strapped together, I'm going to get out of my raft, and I'm going to climb on your cruise ship, and I'm going to figure out you have all these cool things. I could learn from this. I bet I could apply this thing to my little raft, and then I can come back to my raft, and I can actually use that. I don't have to say my raft is better. There's nothing I can learn from your cruise ship. But the fun is that we do it together. And that's really what I want us to do now. And that's what I see us doing here. This isn't a new fangled boat that looks different from all the other boats. This is we're all tied together. And I think we need that, because that's the only way that we're actually going to get there with the state of the world being what it is. So I just hope we feel that. I hope that we're open to that. We don't have that fear that if you ever step off your boat, then you can't possibly go back to your boat. The goal is not to actually leave the boat. The goal is to have fun with your friends while we try to get to the shore. And once we're on the shore, we can figure out who was right, or maybe it's a totally different thing. Maybe the earth really is flat. And we're just all going to go off, but I'd rather go off together than by myself on my raft. So thank you.